The coffee was still dripping from my hair and blouse when the waitress rushed over with napkins. People in the diner were staring, whispering to each other, but I barely noticed them. My daughter had already stormed out of the door, leaving the bell above it shaking loudly. For a moment I just sat there, holding the napkins in my hands, trying to understand how a simple conversation had turned into something so ugly. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was more like the kind of shaking that comes when something inside you finally breaks after years of pressure. I slowly wiped my face and stood up from the booth. The waitress asked if I was okay, and I gave her a small nod, even though I didn't feel okay at all. What hurt the most wasn't the hot coffee. It was the look Darla had given me right before she threw it. It was the same look she used when she was younger and didn't get what she wanted. Only now there was no hesitation in it. No guilt. Just anger. Outside the diner window, I could see her car speeding out of the parking lot. She didn't even look back. For years I had convinced myself that things between us would get better. That one day she would understand everything I had done for her. Every sacrifice. Every sleepless night worrying about how to pay the next bill. But sitting there in that quiet diner, I finally understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. Darla didn't see my sacrifices as love. She saw them as obligation. To her, my help wasn't a gift. It was something she believed she deserved. And when people believe they deserve something, they don't ask for it politely. They demand it. I walked to the counter and paid for both coffees, even the one that had ended up on my clothes. Old habits are hard to break, I suppose. As I stepped outside into the cold afternoon air, I took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, I felt something strange. Not guilt. Not sadness. But the quiet feeling that a line had finally been crossed. When Darla was little, people always said she had a bright personality. She could walk into a room and make everyone smile. Teachers liked her. Neighbors called her sweet. Even strangers often told me how polite she seemed. But there was another side to her that only her father and I truly saw. Darla didn't like hearing the word no. If she wanted something, she expected to get it. A toy, new clothes, a school trip, it didn't matter. If the answer wasn't yes, she would pout, argue, or try to convince us until one of us gave in. My husband, Silas, noticed it early. Many times he would sit with me at the kitchen table after Darla went to bed and say we needed to be stricter with her. He believed she needed clear boundaries so she could grow into a responsible adult. I always thought he was being a little too hard on her. Then life changed in a way neither of us expected. After Silas passed away, the house felt empty and quiet. I was grieving, and Darla was still young. I couldn't stand the thought of making her life harder, so I became softer with her. Looking back now, I see how that changed everything. Darla quickly learned that guilt worked on me. Whenever she wanted something, she would remind me how difficult things had been since her father died. Hearing that always made me feel responsible for her happiness. As she grew older, the pattern continued. She often asked for money and promised to return it later, but the money never came back. When relationships failed or jobs didn't last, there was always someone else to blame. More than once she packed her things and returned to my house, saying she just needed a place to stay until she got back on her feet. Later she married a man named Raymond Whitaker. At first I hoped the marriage would help her settle down. But Raymond soon realized how easily money disappeared around her. Their arguments became constant, and eventually he left. After that, Darla focused all her attention on raising her son, Trenton. Instead of teaching him limits, she gave him everything he asked for. And when her own money ran out, she came to my door again, expecting me to solve the problem. As the years passed, the money requests slowly became a normal part of my life. At first they sounded reasonable. Darla would call and say she was short on grocery money for the week. Sometimes she said her car needed repairs and she didn't have enough saved to fix it. I helped because I didn't want my daughter or my grandson struggling. But the numbers started getting bigger. What used to be a few $100s soon turned into much larger amounts. Darla always had a reason why she needed it right away. A bill had arrived unexpectedly. Something important had broken. She promised she would pay me back when things improved. I stopped keeping track after a while. Many times I quietly took money from the savings I had set aside for my retirement. I told myself that family was more important than numbers in a bank account. Still, something about the situation never felt completely right. Every time I tried to slow down or suggest that Darla manage her money more carefully, the conversation quickly changed. She would say I didn't understand how expensive life was for her. Then she would bring Trenton into the discussion. She would say things like, "He's your grandson. Don't you want him to have what other kids have?" Those words always made me feel guilty, even when I knew the request wasn't necessary. By the time Trenton turned 17, I noticed he had started speaking the same way his mother did. He wasn't rude in an obvious way, but he acted as if my help was something automatic. One afternoon he came over to my house while Darla was at work. We were sitting in the living room when he casually asked if he could borrow my credit card. He said he wanted to buy a new gaming laptop he had been looking at online. The price was around $3,000. He said it like it was no big deal. For a moment I looked at him and felt that familiar pressure to say yes. But something deep inside me finally pushed back. I calmly told him no. It was the first clear refusal I had given in a very long time. At that moment I didn't know that simple answer was about to create a much bigger problem. A few days after I told Trenton no, I called Darla and asked if we could meet and talk. I suggested a small diner not far from her apartment. It was quiet and usually not very crowded in the afternoon. I thought it would be a calm place where we could speak honestly. When Darla arrived, Trenton was with her. They both slid into the booth across from me. At first the conversation was normal. We ordered coffee and talked about small things. But I knew we couldn't avoid the real reason we were there. So after the waitress left, I spoke gently. I told Darla that I loved her and Trenton very much, but I couldn't keep paying for expensive things anymore. I explained that he was almost an adult and it was important for him to learn how to work for the things he wanted. The change in Darla's face was immediate. Her expression became hard, like a door closing. She leaned back and looked at me with a kind of disbelief. "You've always been selfish, Mom," she said. The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment I didn't know how to respond. After everything I had done over the years, I had never imagined she truly saw me that way. Before I could say anything, Trenton laughed quietly and shook his head. He said people my age shouldn't sit on money while younger family members needed it. I stayed calm and repeated what I had already decided. I told them I would not give my credit card or pay for the laptop. That was when everything exploded. Darla grabbed the cup of coffee sitting in front of her and threw it straight at me. The hot liquid splashed across my blouse and face. The sudden movement made several people in the diner turn and stare. For a few seconds no one said anything. Then Darla stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked down at me with pure anger. "Don't expect to see your grandson again," she shouted before walking toward the door. Trenton followed her without saying a word. As I slowly wiped the coffee from my face, something surprising settled inside me. Instead of pain or anger, I felt a quiet sense of relief. Darla had no idea that certain things had already been set in motion long before that moment. Several months before that day at the diner, I had already started noticing things that made me uneasy. At first the signs were small. Darla sometimes mentioned bills she couldn't pay, but the explanations never sounded clear. One week it was a utility bill, the next week it was something else. The stories changed often, and the numbers never seemed to add up. Then there were the questions she began asking. At first they sounded casual, almost like curiosity. She asked where I kept certain documents. Another time she asked if I had updated my will recently. She even joked about what would happen to my house one day. The way she said those things left me with a strange feeling I couldn't ignore. For the first time in my life, I started wondering if my kindness had made me too vulnerable. That thought bothered me enough that I decided to speak with someone I trusted. Years ago, a quiet young man used to visit the library where I worked. His name was Calder Briggs. Back then he was studying law and often spent hours reading in the corner near the windows. Over time we became friendly. After finishing school, he opened a small legal office in town and focused on estate planning. I called him and asked if he had time to look over a few documents for me. A week later I sat across from him in his office while he carefully reviewed my financial papers. He didn't interrupt much while reading. He simply took notes and asked short questions now and then. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me calmly. Then he asked something very direct. "Do you trust your daughter with your estate?" I didn't answer right away. The silence between us said more than words could. Calder nodded slightly, as if he already understood. He explained that there were ways to protect my property and savings from pressure or manipulation. Everything could be arranged legally so that no one could take advantage of me later. Over the next few weeks we quietly organized everything. Documents were prepared. Accounts were secured. Clear rules were written. By the time we finished, every important part of my finances was protected. And Darla never knew any of it had happened. After the day at the diner, everything between Darla and me changed very quickly. For several days I didn't hear anything from her. I thought maybe the silence would give both of us time to calm down. But soon I began receiving phone calls from relatives. An aunt asked why I had stopped helping Darla. A cousin said he heard I was refusing to support my own grandson. One even asked why I had suddenly become so cold toward my family. At first I was confused. Then I realized Darla had been talking to them. She had told everyone that I was keeping my money to myself while Trenton needed help. She made it sound like I had turned my back on them for no reason. Some relatives sounded disappointed in me. Others tried to convince me to do the right thing. Those conversations hurt more than I expected. For a moment I even thought about explaining everything and defending myself. But I remembered the advice Calder had given me when we finished organizing my documents. He told me that sometimes people reveal their true intentions when they think they have control over a situation. Let them show you who they really are, he had said. So I stayed quiet. I didn't argue with anyone. I didn't try to correct the stories Darla was spreading. I simply listened and ended the conversations politely. Weeks passed like that. During that time I slowly began hearing small pieces of information from different people. Darla had been struggling more than she admitted. Several credit cards were already full. Bills were piling up, and collectors had started calling her. It seemed the spending had continued even after our argument. Then one afternoon my phone rang again. This time it was Darla. Her voice sounded tense, but there was no apology in it. She didn't mention the diner or the things she had said that day. Instead, she went straight to the point. She told me she needed money urgently and asked if I could transfer some to her account. The tone of her voice made it clear she wasn't asking out of regret. She was simply expecting me to solve the problem again. 2 days after that phone call, Darla showed up at my house without warning. I heard loud knocking on the front door, the kind that comes from someone who is already angry before the conversation even begins. When I opened the door, she walked straight inside without waiting to be invited. Her face was tense, and she started talking immediately. She said I was making life difficult for her and ruining Trenton's future by refusing to help. I tried to stay calm and asked her to sit down so we could talk properly. But she didn't want a calm conversation. She kept pacing across the living room, raising her voice and blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in her life recently. Then, in the middle of her complaints, she said something that made the entire room feel silent. She said I had no right to act like the money was only mine when she had already used my name to secure help before. At first I didn't understand what she meant. I asked her to explain. That was when she admitted it without realizing how serious it sounded. She had taken out loans using my name. For a moment my heart felt heavy in my chest. It wasn't just borrowing money anymore. This was something far more serious. Using someone else's identity for financial loans is a crime. But instead of shouting or reacting emotionally, I stayed very quiet. Darla seemed to expect a dramatic reaction. When it didn't come, she looked confused. I simply walked over to the small table beside the couch and picked up my phone. Then I called Calder. My voice stayed steady while I explained what had just been said. He listened carefully and told me not to worry. He said we would handle everything properly. Within a few days, formal paperwork began moving through the legal system. The situation was no longer just a family argument. It had become a legal matter. When Darla realized that the situation was now in the hands of a lawyer, her confidence suddenly changed. For the first time, she understood something she had never expected. Her mother was no longer someone she could pressure or control. Over the next week, Calder and his team carefully examined every detail connected to my finances. They checked bank records, loan applications, and credit reports. What they found was more serious than I expected. There were several accounts opened under my name that I had never approved. Some were small personal loans. Others were credit lines taken from different lenders. Each one carried my name and personal information, but the signatures on the documents were not written by me. Calder explained everything slowly so I could understand. The papers clearly showed forged signatures. Someone had filled out the forms pretending to be me. There was no question about who had done it. Once the evidence was collected, Calder arranged a formal meeting and asked Darla to come to his office. I was there as well, sitting quietly across the table while he presented the documents one by one. Darla's confidence disappeared the moment she saw the papers. Her voice became much softer than before. For the first time, she looked uncertain about what might happen next. Calder remained calm and professional. Instead of threatening her immediately, he explained the situation in simple terms. What had happened could easily lead to a criminal investigation. But he also offered another option. He told her that if she agreed to repay every dollar taken through those accounts and stop contacting me for money in the future, the matter could remain private. The room stayed quiet for several seconds after he finished speaking. That was when something unexpected happened. Trenton had been sitting in the waiting area outside the office door. At some point he had come closer and overheard part of the conversation. When he stepped into the room, he looked confused and upset. He began asking his mother questions about the loans and the documents on the table. Darla tried to explain it away, but the truth was already clear. For the first time, Trenton started seeing the situation differently. He realized his grandmother had not been refusing to help out of selfishness. He slowly began understanding that the stories he had been told were not true. And that realization changed the entire situation. After the meeting at Calder's office, life became very quiet. Days passed, then weeks, and I heard nothing from Darla or Trenton. The phone stopped ringing. No messages came from relatives either. It felt strange after so much tension. I spent my time doing simple things around the house. Reading, gardening, and taking walks in the evening. Slowly the stress that had been building for years began to fade. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I heard a knock at my front door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Trenton standing there alone. He looked very different from the confident teenager I had seen before. His shoulders were tense, and he kept his hands in his pockets as if he wasn't sure what to do with them. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he quietly asked if he could come inside. We sat at the kitchen table. He looked down at the surface of the table for a long time before finally speaking. His voice sounded uncertain. He told me he had recently gone through some of the paperwork at his mother's apartment. While searching through the kitchen drawers, he had found a stack of unpaid bills and letters from lenders. Some of them had legal warnings attached. That was when he realized the situation was much worse than he had believed. He admitted that his mother had always told him I was keeping money away from them. She had said I could easily help but simply didn't want to. Now he understood that the story was very different. For the first time in his life, he looked at me and apologized. The words seemed difficult for him to say, but they were sincere. I didn't scold him or remind him of past behavior. Instead, I simply listened. Then I told him something important. Everyone makes mistakes when they are young, but what matters is what they do after they understand the truth. If he wanted to change his direction, he still had time. I offered him something simple but meaningful. A chance to start again with honesty and responsibility. Meanwhile, his mother was dealing with problems that could no longer be ignored. Months passed, and slowly the consequences of Darla's choices became clear. Her financial situation worsened every week. Creditors called constantly, loans went unpaid, and several formal lawsuits were filed. Friends she had leaned on for support began stepping away, unwilling to get involved in her mess. Even some relatives who had once questioned my actions started seeing the truth about what had happened. They realized Darla had been dishonest, manipulating everyone around her, and using my generosity for her own gain. Meanwhile, Trenton started making better choices. He found a part-time job to help with his own expenses while attending community college. At first it was difficult for him, learning responsibility and budgeting money he used to get for free. But over time, he began understanding the value of hard work and the importance of honesty. Slowly, he rebuilt trust with me, showing care and respect he hadn't demonstrated before. One quiet afternoon, we were sitting together on the porch. The sun was low, and the air was cool. Trenton turned to me and said something that made my heart swell. "I used to think you were the problem," he said slowly, pausing to choose his words. "But now I realize, you were the only one who cared enough to say no." I smiled softly at him. Those words meant more than anything I could have imagined. They weren't just an apology, they were a recognition that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that show the deepest love. For years, I had tried to give everything, thinking that love meant saying yes. But I had learned the truth. Sometimes love means refusing to be used, setting limits, and protecting yourself and others from harm, even if it is uncomfortable in the moment. Looking back, I realized the day Darla threw that coffee didn't destroy our family. It revealed who we truly were, what values were real, and who deserved trust. That clarity allowed me to finally reclaim my life, my peace, and my dignity. And most importantly, it gave Trenton a chance to grow into a responsible, honest young man, one who now understood the strength and courage it takes to love the right way.